Hey, welcome to episode 18 of the Edgar Rice Burroughs podcast, where we celebrate the works of the greatest storyteller of the 20th century. My name is Tim DeForest. I'm the author of several books about what I call pre-digital pop culture, such as the pulp magazines that Burroughs was often published in, old-time radio, old comic strips, and other items like that. And I will let my two co-hosts introduce themselves.
Well, my name is Jess Terrell, and you might have bumped into me on Facebook in the group For the Love of All Things Edgar Rice Burroughs, where with Leopold and some 4,000 plus ERB fans, we're talking Burroughs every day, pretty near 24/7. We'd love to have you join us. For the love of all things Edgar Rice Burroughs.
And I'm Scott Stewart. I'm a freelance writer and editor, and I enjoy being part of a lot of the same groups and activities these guys are with. They're really knowledgeable, so keep your ears open.
Okay, and today we're going to be talking about Burroughs' novel, The Mad King, which is an example of Ruritanian literature. So I'm going to start by just briefly reviewing what that is. That phrase comes from the 1894 novel, The Prisoner of Zenda by Anthony Hope, which created this genre. It is a novel that is set in a Central or Eastern European country, but a fictional country. In The Prisoner of Zenda, it was the nation of Ruritania. And this became an actual genre after the success of The Prisoner of Zenda, with many different authors writing in this particular genre. And this is Burroughs, inspired both by that genre and by the outbreak of World War I, to put all that together into his own contribution of Ruritanian literature. His mythical Eastern European country or Central European country is called Lutha, as we'll see in a few minutes. Now, I should note that according to an article on the online ERB zine, which is a great resource that every fan should know about, The Prisoner of Zenda was not in Burroughs' library, and there's no evidence that he actually read that particular book. But we do know from his library that he was a fan of another author who wrote in that genre. But it should also be said that both The Prisoner of Zenda and The Mad King used the plot device of a traveler who happens to be identical in appearance to the king of the country. So it's likely that Burroughs was familiar with the story in Prisoner of Zenda, even if he hadn't read it. And he took the basic idea and went off in his own direction. This is, despite that starting with the same plot device, it is very much an original story and an extraordinarily entertaining story as well. Now, the Mad King, the first part of it, it's two distinct parts, each of one which connect, but each one tells its own story. The first part was published in All Story Weekly as a serial starting in March of 1914. And so it was written just before World War I broke out. The sequel, which is the second half of the novel after the two novellas were put together, was published in Blue Book magazine the following year in 1915. It was also published as a serial. And that part, written after the outbreak of World War I, incorporates the war into the story. So this is probably Burroughs's one true ripped from the headlines story, in that he uses the modern politics and the war that was going on at that moment as major driving forces of the plot. And so that is the novel we're going to be looking at today. I was actually glad we picked it because I had not read it in decades and actually didn't have a clear memory of a lot of the plot points. So I really enjoyed rereading it. And Jess, you were going to review the first 4 chapters of part 1.
Yes, I would love to do that. And I've got ample pages of notes here that I'll be happy to share with you all. Before we do that, though, I have a little bit of house cleaning here I want to do, explain some things up front. I want to be sure to put in, and we'll probably mention this again later on, but it's well worth mentioning. I want to be sure to put in a plug for the webcomics over at www.edgarriceburroughs.com. That's one word. The webcomics is one that is devoted to the Mad King. Martin Gately writes it. He does an extraordinary job. It's a It's a great adaptation. His creative team has included Enrique Alcatina, and now it's Silvestre Siligali, and lettering is by Josh Aiken. So take a look at the Mad King over to ERB Webcomics. It brings the story to life. In fact, I'll reference one or two of the scenes that are depicted in those webcomics here during my little discussion. Now, as exactly where the country of Lutha is, where this takes place, I've got some directions. You can't get there from here. The way I get to Lutha, first of all, you got to find an old map. Find an old map that has Austria and Hungary hyphenated in it. Okay, that's the first thing to do. That'll help a lot. So you find that old map with Austria, Hungary hyphenated. They used to have a hyphen between them, and now they're just two separate countries. They lost the hyphen along the way. So you go over to South Europe, and you start heading north. You get to Austria-Hungary with the hyphen, and then you make your right-hand turn at Austria-Hungary. It'll take you to Lutha. You can't miss it.
If you hit Serbia, you've gone too far.
Good point. Yeah, I've done that. That makes for a long ride. Good point. So yeah, so that's how you get to Lutha. That's about where Lutha is. Lutha, by the way, makes an appearance in the recent Tarzan battle for Plooster. It's just a brief appearance. Barney gets a brief mention, and some people bump into that in Tarzan battle for Plooster. They think they immediately have to go read Mad King. Well, they don't have to. That has come up. That question's come up, and I just want to take a moment to clarify. You don't have to understand Mad King in order to understand Tarzan battle for Plooster. It's just not necessary. It's just a brief meeting, shall we say? Mad King is a fine.
I was saying, when you're reading Battle of Flucidor, it's really an Easter egg. Those who are familiar with the Mad King get a little kick out of it.
Yeah, it's just an Easter egg for a small kick. That's exactly right. Go ahead. You have something else?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you haven't read the Mad King, everything in Battle of Flucidor is still understandable.
And along those same kind of lines, we'll probably get into this later on, but I want to make sure we mention it. Mad King kind of goes hand in hand with Eternal Savage, also called Eternal Lover, because two of the characters out of Mad King, that is Barney Custer and his sister Victoria Custer, make an appearance over in Eternal Savage / Eternal Lover. But both books stand on their own merit. It's just an opportunity. The characters appear in more than one book, so it's not that big a deal. You don't have to know anything about Eternal Lover or Eternal Savage, whatever title you're reading, the same book, in order to enjoy Mad King. All right. Oh, more housekeeping, real quick. I like, and I've indicated this before, and I would encourage it. Maybe y'all's memories are probably better than mine, but I encourage making a little list of characters, just so you know who's who. Now, so I'm going to go through the characters here, and we'll probably recap this later on. We've mentioned Lutha. That's the country of interest. That's the country where much of the action takes place, not all of it, but much of the action. It's a fictional European monarchy. They have a king. That's what that means. They have a king. And like I said, it was back when Austria-Hungary had a hyphen, which means it was just before World War I. That's why you need that old map I talked about earlier. Only if you're going there. If you're not going there, don't worry about the old map. Let's see here. The capital of Lutha is Lustadt, Lustadt, Lustadt. The Mad King, at least in the beginning of the story, is Leopold. After a while, we may all be mad after all some of the frustrating things that happen in the story. The ups and downs of our heroes may disturb all of us. But the Mad King is Leopold. Leopold and our hero, Barney Custer, are cousins. Is that correct, Tim?
I'm not sure if they're first cousins. They may be second cousins. Barney's mother was from Lutha, and she was royalty. So it's either first or second cousins, I think. But
they definitely have a physical resemblance. In other words, with a spitting image of each other. And I apologize for throwing you under the bus there, Tim. I meant to check that. I had big question marks on my notes, but I failed to check it. But I'll say they are cousins with a strong family resemblance. Barney is where some of the other action takes place. Is from Beatrice, Nebraska. Now, Beatrice, Nebraska is a real town. So you can find that on any map. You don't need my hokey directions to find Beatrice. One of the good guys to make a note of here is Prince Ludwig von der Tan. That's a name. Prince Ludwig, Ludwig, von der Tan. He's sometimes known as Old von der Tan. And that's probably not a compliment when they say old. Prince Ludwig von der Tan is a good guy, and he's the enemy of Peter Blentz. Well, Peter Blentz is a villain. He lives in a grim castle. I like to think of the word blah. When I think of Peter Blentz, that reminds me of Blentz, blah, grim castle. Peter's a bad guy. Another villain is von Koblich, Koblich, von Koblich. He is the Minister of War. So he's the Minister of War. You think of conflict, so he's a bad guy, and conflict and Koblich kind of go hand in hand. So I'm using memory aids here. This got me through about 30 years of night school memory aids like this. Another memory aid is the phrase pain in the neck, and that would be for Captain Ernest Menck, M-A-E-N-C-K. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I'm going to call him Menck, M-A-E-N-C-K. He's a villain, clearly, and as I said, he is a pain in the neck, so that's how I remember him. The young lady of interest, the princess of interest. Many Burroughs stories have princesses, so we're not shortchanging the princess department on this one. The young lady of interest is Emma von der Tan. Now, she's the daughter of Ludwig von der Tan, the good guy I mentioned above here a moment ago, and she's the young lady of interest. Another good guy is Lieutenant Butzow. His name is spelled B-U-T-Z-O-W. I will be calling him Butzow. He is a good guy. All right, that's our working roster for the moment. There'll be more people coming and going, but that's who we're going to start with. Any questions? Any questions?
No, that covers the important characters. I will, as we talk about them, we'll mention it more. But Menck certainly is a pain in the neck villain.
Right.
He's not physically dangerous because he's a bit of a coward, but he is one of the most annoying in a good way. Yeah, I mean, you just love seeing him get his comeuppance because he's just so utterly annoying. So when I say annoying in a good way, I mean he's dramatically effective as a villain. But there's no chance he could take Barney in a fight. He's a coward, but he's sneaky and he's backstabbing, and he's just the guy that you love to hate.
He's a weasel.
He's a weasel. That's perfect. Menck is probably Lutheran for weasel.
We've just started the Ernest Menck hate club, I think.
We have. Well, yeah. To know him is to loathe him.
To know him is to loathe him. That's good. I like it. I've gotten weasel written down here. Okay, I've added weasel to my notes. All right, let's see here. So the story grabs your attention. This opening line. Every story needs a good opening line. All Lustadt was in an uproar. The Mad King had escaped. Well, this grabs the reader's attention. It sparks questions such as, where is Lustadt? We've established that. I told you about finding Austria-Hungary and turn right. Ask other questions like, what does uproar really mean? Are the people happy, angry, or perhaps frightened? Who is this Mad King anyhow? Is he mad angry? Is he mad nuts? Or is he mad with passion? And how did he escape, and from where did he escape? Who was holding him prisoner and why? Inquiring minds want to know. And should people be fearful or joyous? So thus spurred forth on with our story. It was 10 years ago when his father died, and young Prince Leopold was rushed to Castle Blentz. I'll just save you some time. If you were taking notes earlier, I told you Prince Leopold is designated as the Mad King, at least in the beginning of the story. The young prince, and that was 10 years ago when he was taken over the Castle Blentz, and the young prince has not been seen since. It is believed by most that Prince Leopold became insane through grief at the death of his father. Well, that could be. Prince Peter of Blentz, who I've already told you is a villain, he's from that grim castle. The grim castle of Blentz was named regent to rule in Prince Leopold's absence from the throne. Well, who named him regent? I don't know. He may have been self-appointed, but anyhow, he's in charge of the country. That would be Prince Peter of Blentz from the grim castle, who we already know is a bad guy. Von Koblich, the Minister of War and Prince Peter's partner in crime, feared some of their improper shenanigans would be discovered by Prince Ludwig von der Tan, who I've already established as a good guy and an enemy of Peter Blentz. This is why you take notes. Meanwhile, the pain in the neck we were just discussing, Captain Ernest Menck, was summoned by the two and dispatched with the Royal Horse Guard to arrange a convenient accident for von der Tan. Accidents in air quotes, in case you didn't see that. Meanwhile, Barney Custer, our hero, makes his first appearance in the country of Luther by pausing to refill his roadster at a gas station. Barney has a face full of whiskers due to a lost bet. Now, we know he's a good guy because he's in a foreign country. He's from the USA. He's from Nebraska. But here he is over in Europe, and he lost a bet that called for him to grow a beard. So he's still staying true to this bet, even though he's a long way from home where it couldn't be verified he's shaved or not. So we know he's a noble man because he's honoring his dead even when he's lost. He's far away from his home of Beatrice, Nebraska, where no one would know if the beard had been shaved or not. Barney Custer is visiting the town of Leustadt in the country of Lutha. Leustadt is the capital of Lutha, for sport hunting and sightseeing. Now, he does have relations there. This is the country of his mother. His mother was named Victoria. His sister's named Victoria, too, who was stolen away as a bride years before by his adventurous father. So driving along, he's got a roadster, these winding country roads. He's just enjoying a great day, beautiful day. He's enjoying it. Barney encounters a beautiful woman on a runaway horse on a narrow mountain road. Barney risked all he could to save her as he, his car, his horse, and the young lady all plunged into a ravine, but doing so in such a way that the girl was left sprawled but safe on the mountain road. Now, that's one paragraph to explain that sequence there. But if you turn to the ERB webcomics I was talking about earlier, they go into much more detail with vivid colors and show the roadster in its glory, the horse, the young lady, and the horse is galloping away, and then they all go rolling down the hill. So that really comes forth there. That's a fine job on the artwork they did over the ERB webcomics. Meanwhile, and it's easily overlooked when you read the story. So you read the story, look out for this. There's a small paragraph that describes an onlooker who is wearing a beard, much like Barney's. And he saw this accident unfold, and he snuck off into the underbrush. So just put that in your back pocket, that there's another fellow roaming around with a beard who looks a lot like Barney, who witnessed this little event occur. Just put that aside for the moment. Having heard reports of the escape of Lutha's Mad King and sporting a devil-may-care attitude, Barney identifies himself to the young lady by saying, "I am the Mad King of Lutha." Well, that's not very smart. I'll just tell you that right now. So he gives her a bad impression. So she believes him. And that wraps up chapter 1 right there. Any thoughts or comments from you all?
Just a detail. Barney is speaking German, which apparently is the language of Lutha.
Right,
So,
it is. You're right.
It just has a note. Lutha does not have its own language, as many small Central European countries do. It has German. And I kind of imagine it being one of the provinces that most of which eventually came a part of Germany in the 19th century, when Germany became an actual country rather than a bunch of small countries like Prussia and so on. And Lutha somehow managed to remain independent. So when Otto Bismarck in the 19th century was forming a centralized German country, Lutha somehow got left out of the loop.
First of all, I think, that's very interesting. I'm so glad you came through with that. It is possible that the mountains, that Lutha could have been a little isolated due to the mountains. We know that they've got big hills there. We've already seen that with this car accident just now. So it could be it just wasn't practical to get in and out of there, and maybe they had a shortage of resources, natural resources. So that could explain why no one was interested in them. Although as wars develop and people want land, that could change. But we're not there yet.
Yeah.
But that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
And the other thing I'm going to mention is him identifying himself as the king, which is just like meant to be a joke on his part, and he didn't realize how closely he resembled the king. And this sets up one of the funniest, I mean, the comedy over the next chapter, with Emma convinced he's the king and that he's nuts. And then with Barney eventually deciding that Emma must be nuts because he thinks he's a king and figures she must have escaped from a sanitarium. Burroughs has a great sense of humor. And I think it shows in the chapter you're about to describe more vividly than in almost any other book he wrote.
I also think this book has some of its strongest dialogue too. Like when they're doing the give and take back and forth. It reminds me of some of the screwball comedies and stuff.
I think that's true.
Yeah, and regarding the dialogue and the humor involved, I was fairly, I'll use the word intimidated, but figure out how I was going to relate that to the summary. So I've summarized it. But to your point, I would encourage anyone, even if you don't read the entire book, at least take a look at these first 2 to 4 chapters. I think the dialogue is very strong. I agree. The humor is superb, and don't judge it based on my summary. Read it for yourself. And the sequence with the auto accident with going down the hill, the runaway horse is much better written than I've described here. So by all means, take a close look at that. Spend a few minutes with the book. I think you'll enjoy it. All right, thank you all for your comments. Moving on with part 1, chapter 2, Over the Precipice. When Barney Custer introduced himself as the Mad King of Lutha, instead of hearing Emma chuckle, Barney instead saw a look of wonderment and concern on her face. Emma saw that Barney actually did have a striking resemblance to the king, and with rumors about the king being loose, it was easy for Emma to believe that Barney was the rightful king. She didn't know anything about the king's family. She didn't know anything about a cousin from America. So she called him Leopold and displayed appropriate protocol for royalty, and immediately the situation became complicated. Thus began a comedy of misunderstanding and of errors. Barney tried to straighten her out, but she believed he was just trying to cover his true identity by claiming that he was someone named Barney Custer. Golly, who would be named that? Her insistence on believing that was so intense and so sincere, in fact, that soon Barney Custer started believing that if anyone was insane, it was the young lady Emma. As a humanitarian, Barney became determined to help Emma find her way back to the asylum from which she had no doubt escaped. It was a double-edged misunderstanding, or perhaps a two-way misunderstanding. Both of them misunderstood is what I'm trying to say. So despite this two-way misunderstanding, Barney takes a fancy to Emma, and a bond develops as they make their way through the forest, even though each thought the other was insane. Just imagine that. She's nuts, but I'll hang around with her. That guy's crazy, but I can't abandon him. He's the king. So here they are in the forest having these thoughts about each other. During all of this, Emma introduces herself as Princess Emma von der Tan, which is correct. But Barney does not believe. He considers it as further proof that the young lady has a screw loose. However, he is attracted to her, so can't ignore that. In one instance, Barney had to carry Emma across the stream, and it felt so good to have her in his arms that he engineered the stream crossing so it took longer than it otherwise would. Let's take the long way through the water instead of the short way. On the other hand, Emma noticed the lengths to which this insane, yet likable, man was going to cross a simple waterway, but she liked it as well as him. So they're getting along pretty good despite their opinions of each other, internal opinions of each other. Now, Emma was trying to direct Barney over to the Castle von der Tan near the Tan River. You can find that on your map with a hyphen. She explained that other people had been loyal to the House of Leopold for the past 300 years. She explained that her family had been loyal to the House of Leopold for the past 300 years. Barney, meanwhile, hoped that they were really heading toward the insane asylum, since he believed this princess and the castle stuff to be part of her delusion. But their journey was interrupted when a bandit burst from the bushes, brandishing a pistol and demanding money. Then the bandit saw a chance for even more money when he too thought Barney was the missing Mad King Leopold, for whom a reward was offered, dead or alive. So the bandit ordered Barney to reach, and Barney did reach, not for the sky, but for the outlaw's gun. And soon the two were locked in combat. Emma grabbed a rock to bonk the bandit on the head, but before she could do so, both Barney and the bandit rolled over a precipice and down into a ravine. About that time, 3 soldiers show up and accompany the princess down the embankment to see if Barney is okay. At first, she thought Barney was dead. Then she let it slip that Barney was the Mad King. Well, this got the soldiers' attention. They were pleased with this news, so they could report the news to their ruler, and I presume collect the reward. This refrain may sound more like a celebration. The king is dead, the officer said, and a reference to Peter Blintz added, "Long live the king." So if the king were indeed to die, and this is the real king, which is not Barney at the moment, then Peter of Blentz, who's already in charge of the country, would assume the throne without question. That ends my comments for chapter 2, Over the Precipice. Anything from you all?
I just want to emphasize that we are seeing Barney act with great physical courage in several occasions here. Jumping first with the car rescue, and second here, jumping the armed burglar. And we're also seeing, as you mentioned, his sense of honor and honesty. He wants to make sure Emma's okay, even though he mistakenly believes she's insane. He's acting honorably towards her. Your point from the last chapter about him not shaving off his beard, even though he could have cheated and done so on his bet, was up on that. But that's actually great. It's another hint at his sense of honor and his sense of honesty, which is going to be a driving force for him all through this novel. Even when he's going to be forced to pretend to be Leopold, he does so only when he absolutely has to, and will stop as soon as he can bring forward the truth without hurting anybody. So we are getting solid indications throughout these 2 chapters of just how cool a guy Barney is.
He exhibits those hero qualities, code of ethics, principles of behavior. Of most Burroughs heroes, one of the things I find exciting and valuable in the ERB books, the Burroughs books, and I mentioned it in my discussion group and in my writing here and there. Those are principles that I think we could all learn from, and I think they were influential as young people back when I was a little fellow. We're reading these books and growing up. Here you have a role model for you. Now, jumping off the roof and swinging on a tree may not be a safe thing to do, but there are good things to be learned from these heroes. Moving on now to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is entitled, and this is chapter 3, part 1. I might add, part 2 has its own set of chapters, but part 1, chapter 3 is called "An Angry King." Note the title that the word "angry" is another word for mad. Just make a note of that. And let's also remember Emma is a princess. We established that, and I'll be referring to her simply as Emma, but there's no royal disrespect intended. I've read this so many times. Emma and I are on a first name basis now, so she's a princess. Don't forget that. Remember also that Barney is not the Mad King, but everyone thinks he is. So that's another thing to keep in mind. In the last chapter, we closed with Emma thinking that Barney, who she believed to be Leopold, the Mad King of Luther, was dead. The few soldiers who happened along at the right time stood in awe at the death of a king. That's not something you see every day. While Emma cradled his head in her lap and mourned, she also took his wrist, hoping for a sign of life. Suddenly, bad timing, Barney opened his eyes, and the quick-thinking Emma immediately regretted she told the soldiers that this was the king, and at the same time attempted to keep them from discovering he was still alive. She wanted the soldiers to leave her alone in the forest so she could properly mourn and grieve, but they insisted on taking Emma and the body of the king, Barney, who's still very much alive, taking the body to Peter of Blentz. And since their orders were to bring back anyone found in the company of the escaped mentally unbalanced king. Well, about that time, Barney fully awakens and tossed out a couple of clever one-liners. The guy's back from the dead and he's telling jokes. And as the soldiers prepared to take him in, he tried to explain that he was not really Leopold, but of course that proved he was indeed Leopold. I mean, everyone thinks he's Leopold since only a mad king would claim not to be a king. This is some more of that humor that Tim is referring to. It's much funnier when Burroughs writes it than when I read it. As they rode to the castle of Blentz, Barney began to realize that Emma might not be insane, as he previously thought, since the soldiers addressed her as princess. Either there or everyone's nuts around here. The keeper of the castle gate. Now where are we going to? The castle of Blentz. The keeper of the castle gate, Carl Schonau, Schonau. He's not in that roster of people that I mentioned earlier. He calls Emma a wench. Barney reacted with anger. He took offense to this statement. He leapt from his horse and slugged Schonau. Schonau draws his sword to run Barney through, but one of the soldiers, Lieutenant Bootsau, and Emma came to his defense. Now, Lieutenant Bootsau is someone else I did mention earlier. We'll see more from him later on. Bootsau did, we're going to see it right now. Bootsau pardon me. Bootsau then delivered Barney to his superior, Captain Ernest Mink. That's that pain in the neck I told you about. Captain Mink, he's on our villain list. Once again, Barney tried explaining to the captain his true identity and petitioned for the immediate release of himself and the Princess Emma. However, his explanation was taken for the ravings of a madman. No one believes anybody in this story. And everyone thinks they're a psychiatrist. Now, I really don't want to defend Mink, but in his defense, since the true king had been kept in isolation for 10 years, Mink admits he had never seen the real king, so he had a little trouble identifying him. Likewise, of the palace staff, those who would have been familiar with the true king had been replaced after his escape to get rid of any who may have had a role in his break for freedom. So they couldn't identify the true king either. Emma did not like the way that Mink addressed her king, and she told him so. She was aware of the nasty stories of Mink's past life too, all those shenanigans I mentioned earlier. Mink ordered Barney to be confined, at the same time insulted Emma. Once again, this caused the angry king, this is Barney I'm speaking of, to roar forth. Barney charged Mink, pummeling him before Bootsau pulled Barney off Mink and tried to get between Barney and Mink. In the scuffle, Mink took a sword swipe at Barney, but Barney fended it off. Bootsau then did a surprising thing. With drawn sword, he ordered his superior officer to cease his efforts to harm the king. Bootsau said he had sworn an oath to protect the king of Lutha, and he intended to keep that oath. Bootsau hinted that he would have no choice but to slay Mink should the king, Barney, order him to do so. Since Bootsau was known as a master swordsman, Mink wisely backed off. Barney demanded he apologize to Emma, and that too came grudgingly from the lips of Mink. However, Barney still had to go directly to jail. His prison was a small apartment on the upper floor with locked doors, and that concludes Chapter 3 of Part 1, Chapter 3, entitled An Angry King. Any thoughts or comments?
These opening chapters are a great example of how skilled a storyteller Burroughs was, because the story's moving fast. There's full of action. It's never slow. The pacing's very fast. But through that action and through the, as you guys have mentioned, really well-written dialogue, we are getting to know these characters. We know that Barney is both brave and honorable. We know that Emma is quick thinking and loyal to her king, even though she thinks he's nuts at the moment. We know that Bootsau is where he is because of his duty as a soldier, but that he's a decent human being. He is expertly, without slowing the pace of the story at all, he is expertly introducing these characters to us and giving us a good idea of what sort of characters they are.
Very well said. You're right. We've gone over the river and through the woods and down the hill, and we're getting to know all these people, and we finally made our way to Castle here. Well said. All right. Moving now to Part 1, Chapter 4. This Chapter 4 is entitled Barney Finds a Friend. He could probably use a friend right now. After Barney was taken away, Captain Mink made an attempt to sweet-talk Emma, but she, of the noble house of Von der Tan, preferred being a prisoner in Castle Blentz to being a guest of this Captain Mink. Once again, I said he was a pain in the neck. He's living up to his name. Emma was led to luxurious apartments, but was not locked in. Emma did throw the bolt to keep out unwanted visitors. Despite its stateliness and comfort, the apartments were less than friendly due to an overpowering portrait of a former princess of Blentz who seemed to look at the intrusion of her apartment with intense disapproval. It's one of those paintings on the wall that the eyes watch you wherever you go. So that's what Emma is rooming with, is a portrait of a former princess there. Meanwhile, Barney was brought to his quarters, and Dr. Stein informed Barney that he needed to take medicine in order to have his insanity cured. Well, see the word Stein, I immediately think Frankenstein. Now, there's no reference to a Frankenstein in this book, but I think the word Stein may be there just to suggest some evilness, perhaps.
Yeah, that's actually very insightful. I never thought of that.
Well, thank you. I really have to give credit for that thought to John Martin, a good friend of mine, longtime Burroughs fan, and one of my group members. We were discussing this book, and he pointed that out. So I need to give John a gift that credit right there for Dr. Stein. Barney's keeper was a man named Joseph. He would see to it that Barney took the medicine as directed, or else Barney would be force fed. So you just can't catch a break here. Here we go. However, as soon as the doctor and soldiers left, we do catch a break. Joseph revealed himself to be a secret ally of Van der Tan, and he was there to help Leopold escape. Now, he thinks Barney is the king, and the king is Leopold. So that's why I'm saying he's there to help Leopold escape. Although what he will really be doing is help Barney escape. That's another thing in Burroughs' story. Sometimes one person that carries more than one name around, another good reason to make a list.
Mhm.
So Barney may get referred to as the Mad King. He may get referred to as Leopold, but it's Barney who hasn't shaved yet. So still talking about Joseph here. Furthermore, Joseph revealed the medicine was in reality, get this, bichloride of mercury, which sounds painful, and just one dose would kill him within a few days, painful and deadly. So Joseph happened along at the right time to save Barney from a fate worse than death. Barney said he would not escape, being the hero. Barney said he would not escape unless Princess Emma could come along too. And as soon as Joseph learned that the princess was on the premises, he agreed. So he's all on board with this. At the same time, Barney learned from Joseph that years ago, the fathers of Emma and Leopold had betrothed them to be married. So Emma's supposed to marry Leopold. Now that's the real king, of which Barney is not. So that's Barney's cousin that has been promised to Emma. However, we've already seen that Emma has developed sympathy, if not feelings, sympathy at the very least, for Barney, thinking he is the king. A tangled web. Joseph also noticed that Barney was not wearing the royal ring of Luther, and was indignant that the Blintz crew had ripped it from Barney's hand. Barney, however, tried to explain that he did not possess the ring, and that was proof that he was not the king. But does anybody believe him? No, of course not. Joseph said that, to the contrary, the fact that you do not have the ring is positive proof you are king, and that they have sought to hide the fact by removing the insignia of your divine right to rule on Luther. As I say, it's much better when Burroughs writes it, but this is a hoot.
Mm-hmm.
We can't win for losing. The only way of fetching Emma, so they're planning their escape here. The only way of fetching Emma appeared to be through busy hallways until Barney learned from Joseph the details of the castle's secret passage system. It's a castle, they got secret passages. Something's got to be in between those big walls. He found they could probably navigate through the passages to find a better route to Emma's quarters. So they're plotting their escape, and they're going to use secret passages. They may use secret passages. We'll find out here in a minute. In fact, they did. They took the secret passage to the upper floor, where they headed down an empty hallway to a window directly overlooking the moat. Castles have moats too. And one floor below them, the window to Emma's apartment. Just then, Barney heard voices from the apartment below, and after listening a moment, determined that the immediate action was needed. The rope, Joseph, he said, and for God's sake, be quick about it. That's the end of part 1, chapter 4, where Barney finds a friend.
Yeah, and that secret passage, which is a key plot point here, it's going to come back big time as a key plot point in part 2. So I love it that Burroughs is, I don't even know if he was planning on writing part 2 at this point, because part 2 obviously was driven, the plot of it was driven by World War I, which hadn't broken out yet.
Right.
But he expertly uses this secret passage when the action returns to this castle during the events of part 2. So it might have been serendipity, but this is, a Chekhov's gun, so to speak, that comes back later at a key point. And it's just kind of a wonderful plot twist.
Well said. And as I like to say, the Burroughs oftentimes leaves little hooks for future use. Mm-hmm. Sometimes he uses those little hooks, and sometimes they're still laying around for someone else to use. I think this may be a big hook. Secret passage might qualify as a big hook. And I don't have it. Oh, I do have it in front of me. Let's see here. Mad King All Story Weekly appeared there March 21, 1914. I don't have Burroughs' writing schedule, but the second half of this story, which is part 2, which we haven't gotten to yet, appeared in All Story Weekly August 1915. So that was a year and some 3 or 4 months when he got back, when those stories were published, which gave him time to work on Eternal Savage for sure, and maybe some other books as well. We have to look at his writing schedule to determine that. But that's a better than a year apart on publishing dates. Go ahead.
Yeah, I actually tried to find out if he was planning on writing a sequel at the time he wrote part one, but I couldn't find any reference to that one way or the other. Because I would be curious, because part one has a satisfying ending. If it had been, if it had been a story in of itself, you would have come to an ending that was dramatically satisfying. But also, as we'll see, Barney doesn't have the girl at the end of part one. So
True.
I have the feeling that Burroughs was planning on writing the sequel, and when World War I began, it just meant he had to change whatever he might have already had plotted out. He was going to have to change that to account for the First World War, or the Great.
I think that's a very good point. The impact of the war may have affected his writing schedule, and there's probably some details on that. We can dig through Porges or some of the stuff that ERB's seen may answer that question. He may have there may have been some editor saying, I need another Tarzan story, or here's an opportunity to write this kind of story, that may have pulled him away from this. Obviously, this work was off to a fine start, so it does look to me like he set it aside for a while, and with the idea of getting back to it at a later time. But he left the hook for the way the story could be continued, or it could be wrapped up in a couple chapters after this. They could in the next chapter, they might have found Emma and then made their way out of the castle, and Barney may have found refuge someplace, and he could do that a couple chapters, maybe 3 chapters, and be done with it. But of course, he expanded the story far beyond that, and did tie it in with World War I, as you said.
And whatever he might have had planned at the end after writing part one, he would have had to have changed the plot drastically. It wouldn't have just changed his writing schedule. It would have changed the plot of the story dramatically as well, because the war is such a vital part of the second half.
Right. If memory serves, and I'd have to look at his writing schedule. It seems like Land of Time Forgotten was written around 1915, give or take. Okay. So he may have squeezed that one in. Not to mention, let's see here, Tarzan, Jules Vopar, and certainly Tarzan Untamed would have been during World War I, if memory serves. So, and then there was a question of how to finish that book. Talk about leaving hooks for sequels. And the question there of what to do with Jane. So he had other things going on, is all I'm trying to say. I'm trying to fit it all. And this is certainly during one of his most productive periods. He was cranking out books right and left.
Well, Scott, you were going to pick up the chapter summaries with chapter 5 here.
Yeah, chapter 5, 6, 7, and 8. And these 4 chapters in part 1 almost could be a novella by themselves. There's a lot of stuff that happens here, and it's got kind of a beginning and a ending to it, although not all the loose ends are tied together. But one of the things when I was reading this is I think this would have the makings of an exceptional limited series or mini series, like Netflix and Amazon's doing with a lot of stuff now, because the parts just talked about, either one of those chapters or that section could be a night of the show in itself. I could see this easily being 4 episodes, 4 hours or 6-hour movie, because there is, with the second part, there's so much that he encompasses here. So in chapter 5, that starts out, Emma is now in the room. She's picked up a magazine or periodical, and she's kind of reading that, but she's having a very hard time concentrating it and just like reading, because she's got luxury time. She's getting a little paranoid about what's going on, and hearing noises, and at one point she looks over in the painting that Jess had mentioned of the princess from the castle there, she sees it like starting to move and float towards her, and freaks her out enough. She gets up and starts walking backwards. And it turns out it's the movement of a hidden door behind it, again, like a secret passage. And that's when uh, the weasel comes to visit. Hank comes in there. And of course, he is hot for her. Use modern terminology. She can't stand him. And he's trying to close in on her, which is the dialogue and the noise that Barney hears when he's upstairs and starts hearing noise through the window. And then she picks up like a copper plate or a bowl and throws it hard enough where Burroughs writes that it sliced the flesh on his cheek where it almost went as deep as the jawbone. That's a pretty tough throw.
Mhm. Yeah, Emma is awesome here in this moment. I mean, she doesn't take it lying down. She fights back, and she does so. If her aim been a little better, she might have taken out a major villain right there.
Exactly. But Burroughs didn't let her do that because he knew he needed to have him around. So that, of course, makes Mainz incredibly angry, and he jumps over and starts strangling her. And he does outweigh her. He's bigger than her, and she has a hard time fighting back on it. And about this time, then Barney comes flying in through the window and gets in there, and he's carrying a sword. And Mank, he takes off because, as you're talking before, he's a coward. He knows Barney's probably going to whip his butt, and he goes out through that secret door behind the portrait and takes off. And then Barney gets Emma, and they go out on the windowsill there, and there's a rope, and Joseph's up at the top, so they tie her to it, and he pulls her up along the wall to get her into that room up there. Meanwhile, Barney's standing there, and he's starting to hear noise. He's like, "Come on, Joseph, pull her up. Come on, pull her up. They're going to be coming back. They're going to be coming back." He finally gets Emma in and drops the rope back down, but that's right when they burst through the door there. So he's like, so they're looking around the room for them or seeing where they might be, and he's partially hidden. And he tells Joseph, grab the rope and take off, and you two get to safety. And they hear the words talking, so they head over to a window, and just enough to see him drop down into the moat below. What they don't know is that it appears Mr. Custer is also an excellent high platform diver. And so, go ahead.
I think one of us just laughed.
Oh, hey, I guess Johnny Weissmuller could.
Actually, Johnny Weissmuller could have had the skills to play Barney, the physical skills at least.
Yeah. So they figure she also dropped with them. They don't know she escaped up above, and that odds are really good that the length he went down, that he probably hurt himself or drowned or something like that, though they will continue to look for him. And he gets out of the water and takes off through the woods there. And meantime, Joseph takes Emma, and they start finding a way out by taking that same secret passage you were talking about before. And as Barney goes into the woods to hide and get away from the soldiers that are coming out and looking for him, he does get away from them, and he tries to avoid the main roads or any paths that people might catch him on. He gets on one difficult mountain type trail, and he sees a couple guys on horseback. It's sort of like, okay, go up there. They see him. He walks up there, and he's just saying, "Hey, I'd like to know the way to get to and through the old forest, and then to Van. I'm going to say Van Tramp, and that's not right. Emma's father is Kessel.
Van Tan, or
Yeah,
Von Tan, or rather.
Von Tan.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's a good guy.
Mm.
And they say, sure, we can do that, but how do we know who you are? Because these guys are really actually afraid that he's a soldier at first, and maybe an officer because the sword he's still carrying. And so they're paranoid about that. And then they say, well, come with us. And one is riding a horse in front of them, and one's riding a horse behind him. After a while, Barney's like, this doesn't seem quite right. And he says, thanks, guys, but I think I'm going to try another way. I don't really care about going to the old forest at this time. And they rear up, and one of them pulls out a gun and says, no, you're going to stay with us. And that's the end of chapter 5, which is called The Escape.
Yeah. Now, what I wanted to say, like, Barney's in full swashbuckler mode here. When he breaks into the room with Emma, he actually crashes through the window, doesn't he? Just that typical, like the most typical swashbuckler move of all time is to crash into a window at
with a sword
to rescue the girl with a sword. And then the dive into the moat too is another classic swashbuckler thing. I mean, I don't know what Barney majored in at college, but I think it might have been swashbuckling.
Oh, maybe.
Because he turns out to be a good swordsman too later on. So
yeah,
it's like we later find out he's kind of a businessman in part 2, but he has like all these swashbuckler schools.
well, you find out a little bit more about his family and the schools he probably attended. He probably did do fencing and swimming and all that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Probably was part of his growing up.
Yeah.
Success in business may be measured by the length of your sword.
Yeah. That kind of reminds
go
me.
ahead.
I'm sorry. This is an aside, but there was just reminds me of a television series from the 1960s called The Time Tunnel about two physicists who were lost in time, but no matter where they ended up, they were both great in fistfights, and they knew how to use the weapons of that period. And I always wondered where they went to graduate school. And it's probably the same school that Barney went to.
You could shoot bow and arrows, and they could make bombs, and
exactly
and sword fight. I loved that show. I've got that on DVD. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't hold up extremely well, but when I want a bit of nostalgia, it's a great thing to sit down and watch in the evening.
Mm-hmm. I enjoy that show too. I actually think it does hold up, some of the episodes anyway.
It was another one of the, correct me if I'm wrong, Irwin Allen's family that included Lost in Space for sure, and maybe Land of the Giants.
Yeah,
maybe.
Land of the Giants and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
That's it, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, right.
Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, the early ones hold up really well.
Yeah, that first season was superb, like spy dramas with a touch of science fiction.
I felt, I liked it, put it this way, I liked it when Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea added the mini sub, the flying sub.
Mm-hmm.
That seemed to open. I thought that opened up some storylines for them.
Yep. Okay, we've changed
back to
Irwin Allen podcast. That was my fault.
We might have to do an Irwin Allen. Yeah.
Actually, an Irwin Allen podcast would be fun.
It would be a blast.
Mm-hmm.
Or a view along like we did with the movies that night.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Well, since we've digressed, may I interrupt here for just a moment?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
During all of this, I was tracking down Burroughs' writing schedule, which is at erbzine.com, that very valuable resource that I visit multiple times every day. Thank you, Bill Hillman, for keeping that website going. Thank you so much, Bill. I've been writing down Burroughs' writing schedule during this time period as we were discussing that. And I always like to go to the reference books. And erbzine is certainly a virtual and very valuable reference. This was let's see here. This is the sequel right here. Okay, so bear with me. These are I didn't write down all the detail. These are the highlights. These are the big chunks. So Mad King of Luther, that's the first part. That's the part that we're working on now of the Mad King book that appeared in, that was the first pulp magazine. He wrote that from October 26 to November 24, 1913. October 26, November 24. Before the year 1913 ended, he wrote New of the Neoscene. That's the first part of Eternal Savage / Eternal Lover. Now get this. And as I said, this is a productive period. I think about how long it takes me to crank out a short story. Listen to this. 1914, from January 7 to February 9, Burroughs wrote Beast of Tarzan. Now, there may be some tweaking, there may be some fine tuning, but he got the basic story written. Okay. February 12, March 4 was Lad in the Line. Tuvia, Maid of Mars was April 16 to June 20. June 8 to June 13, that's like 5 days, was At the Earth's Core. July 23, August 17, Caveman, that's the first part of Cave Girl. August 21, September 14, Sweetheart Primeval. That is the second half of Eternal Savage, Eternal Lover. And then the sequel to Mad King was written September 26, November 1, 1914. I kid you not.
Wow.
Is that an impressive output?
That is amazing. The man was just a natural storyteller. He could
He
pump
was.
them out that good, and realizing he probably had to do some rewrites on these before they were good enough to publish, and that he could get them out at all that quickly was just amazing.
Well, there was also some smaller projects here that I didn't even bother mentioning, but it's there. This is at erbzine.com. I can tell you if you want to look into it. I can give you the exact website. It floors me, and it just doesn't surprise me because I've looked at this many times before, but still every time I look at it, it floors me to see how productive he was. All right, so I was trying to address our question from earlier, whatever it was.
Okay,
I'm done.
good information.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Scott, you were up to chapter 6.
Yeah, we're going, it's called The King's Ransom. And the soldiers there take Barney in to a camp where there are other men hanging around a campfire and such. And one of the bandits who it becomes obvious he's the leader of the group. It's called Yellow Franz. And he talks about him being like probably the largest of the men in blonde hair. I kind of think of him as maybe a blonde-haired Conan or some of the characters you might see in like The Princess Bride or something. A great big land pirate or whatever. And he looks at Barney and thinks of him as that he is the king because he's got one of the posters mentioning the king and a reward for him. And so he wants to keep him there. And he sends a man out to talk to not Mank, Peter.
Peter of Lance.
About a reward for him. And while he's there, there's a camp boy there named Rudolph, and he brings him food and he talks. He goes, "What's a young boy like you doing here, learning to become a bandit?" And he's actually more or less kidnapped because his father owns Yellow Franz money. And so he's taking the boy along basically as security, escrow, whatever you want to call it. But he just as soon kill him too. Yellow Franz can sometimes come off a little humorous, he did to me, but he is not a good guy. He enjoys hurting and killing. So they're there for several days, and the man comes back from Peter and says that Peter doesn't want him. At least he doesn't want him alive, so he won't pay ransom, but he will pay for his death and proof that he is dead, which works okay for Yellow Franz. So he says, "Oh, I'm going," he tells Barney what he's found out. And he goes, but Barney says, well, go ahead, get it over with. Or his manner catches Yellow Franz off guard because it's, again, we're talking like the swashbuckler thing and stuff. It's kind of debonair, but a little bit of that tongue-in-cheek, James Gardner, Rockford Files, Indiana Jones, Earl Flynn type thing kind of talking out of the side of his mouth, and which because the mouth goes, I don't have to kill you right away. I'll give you a little time. And only a few minutes seem to go. And he goes, if you want, I'll give you time to pray. So he pretends like he's praying. He says, well, hurry on with it. So his little time to stay away is more like 15 minutes, not 15 days. And just he'd already chased the boy Rudolph out of there, and he tried to hit him hard and hurt him when he got out, but the boy escaped that hit. And he pulls up the gun, and just as Barney thinks it's over for him, he hears the report go off, but instead Yellow Franz drops to the ground. And Rudolph had come back with one of the carbines rifles that the other guys have around the campfire, and he shot him. And part of it was he'd never shot a man before. He's scared, but he's like, he knew sooner or later he'd probably get killed by someone else in the camp. And he believes this guy is the king too. And he has pledged loyalty to him, and his family is loyal to the royal family and wants to help him get out. And so they head out into the woods. They aren't too far before they hear voices and realize that they've discovered their leader dead, and that they're going out through the woods. They manage to zip around different areas there, and for the most part, they escape them at this time. They're in an area where they're talking about rain and dampness, and Rudolph gets sick, has that one of those hacking coughs that won't go away, where it comes lodged in the lungs. And Barney wants to get him into a doctor and decides he will the next day. They've been out now hiding for about 3 weeks, and they spent some time where there's a fresh spring and drinking water there. And once you know it, two of the outlaws show up on horses and see him there. And they end up getting cornered, but the outlaws both are killed by them, so they will go from there. But Rudolph also gets shot. And it's been years since I picked up the Mad King, and I enjoyed it more this time than the last. Maybe I was younger or didn't enjoy it much, but I forgot about this part with Rudolph getting killed. And it's the main character, Barney, is really hurt and haunted by that. And I did not recollect it. I was not ready for that. I figured he's going to end up being a squire at the end of the story, or who knows, So it really caught me off guard. It was a big point.
It really is. Yeah, I was going to say, it really is an emotional moment. You get to like Rudolph, and you're rooting for him, and you're kind of thinking, well, Barney can take him under his wing, and he'll be his sidekick, and it'll be cool, and and then all of a sudden he's dead. And Burroughs has done that in other novels sometimes. He would introduce a sympathetic character who would then die tragically. I was thinking of in Beasts of Tarzan, there was a Swede whose name I'm forgetting, who helped James get from the village.
I think he was called the Swede.
I think he was, yeah. And then and then when he gives his life helping Jane get away, it just has this emotional impact.
Yeah.
And here Rudolph has saved Barney's life, and they've had this like 3 weeks together out in the woods, bonding as trying to make a getaway, and then Rudolph, bang, is killed. And Burroughs does an expert job of generating the emotions we should feel. There's a real sense of tragedy to Rudolph's death here.
Yeah, it was very unexpected. When he first got shot, figure, okay, he's going to get help, because you figure I'm thinking of him as a character that's going to be around and kind of a sidekick or whatever, and get to go back to his family, to his dad. It's just like, whoa. Anyway, we then step up into chapter 7, called The Real Leopold. And he has left the scene now. Barney has, and he's riding on one of the horses. and zigzagging around and coming out of the woods, he ends up at the ravine where he had the car wreck. And the car is lifted up, been hoisted up and moved. He's kind of like, how, wonder why that happened or what's going on. And horse carcass is there and rotting away. So he goes on up and enters the shop where he had been before in the village there with Herr Kramer. And shopkeeper's like, oh, the king, what are you doing here now? He says, well, did they let you out already? And he's like, what do you mean? No, I just visited you last night at the sanitarium. He's not realizing it's not the king, that's Barney. And Barney's like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And I said, well, we found him, or someone found him, pinned under the car, which was why he was lifted up. And he's in the sanitarium or hospital now to get better. And Barney's like, can you take me to him? I'm very curious about this. And that's pretty much what happens in that chapter, except he does go into the hospital and talks to him. And the guy's like, I don't want to be king. I never wanted to be king. I don't want to do this. And Barney's there alone with him. And he's like, clasps his hand while the guy's laying in a hospital bed. He feels a ring and the insignia on it and realizes it is the royal ring. He's thinking about Rudolph dying and Emma and the people who are rooting for the Mad King to come back to power. And so he gets very discouraged because the king's adamant about not wanting to take the throne, because Peter's is going to be coronated like in a day or two, very, very soon coming up. And so he starts appealing to him about the good he could do and the importance of his family and his place, community, and what he can do for people. And after about half hour, then the real king, Leopold, warms up to the idea, and he's like, you know what? I think you got some good points here. Do that. So now Barney leaves and feels real good about that result. And meantime, of course, in a room next door, a door opens and a little slimy looking, solemn, sallow, skin color, pale, probably a short version of Mink, a weasel, comes out of the room, and this guy is probably up to no good. And that's the feeling I get there. And that's
Yeah, it's chapter 7.
Number 7, yeah.
Yeah, it's this chapter that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that there was no evidence that Burroughs had read The Prisoner of Zenda. It's this chapter that makes me think that he had to have been at least familiar with the plot, because he does there's going to be an interesting twist here comparing the two novels. In The Prisoner of Zenda, the king was kind of this drunken lout, but he during the time he's prisoner, he kind of pulls himself together and he's determined to be a good king. Here we find that Leopold is a frightened, wimpy little snot. And it briefly looks as if Barney's going to encourage him, and Leopold might actually step up the bat and do the right thing in the end. And we know that Leopold never does, that he stays a selfish, whiny little snot the whole time. So I think Burroughs might have been raising our expectations that part of the story was going to be Leopold redeeming himself, because that's what happened in The Prisoner of Zenda. So a lot of people reading this are going to be expecting the same thing. And then he's going to turn that around and say, nope, in the end, Leopold's just a jerk.
Yeah, he sure is. So it brings us up to chapter 8 in the first part of the book here, the Coronation Day, it's called. And Barney heads out for where the coronation is going to be at Tan Castle. And while he's there, he ends up meeting up with Butzel, who is with a small group of troops, and he was introduced several chapters before. And he, of course, thinks Barney is the king, and Barney's afraid that he's going to like trick him or hold him prisoner. And he says, no, we need the real king. We need you to be coronated, not Peter. And also during this time, Emma, let's see if I'm reading this right. Emma has heading out because she's going to be there with her father, and she's going to be at the coronation too. The coronation goes on. Oh, go ahead. Was there?
I was just going to say, I think this is the first indication we got that Emma did escape from the castle with Joseph later on, because Barney would have been unaware of that until now.
Yeah. I think you're right about that. It is. So it picks up coronation, and they're going through the ceremony and getting closer, where the crown's getting closer and closer and closer to his head. And Emma's watching her father be there, being very politically correct, very stoic. He doesn't really want this because he doesn't get along with them. But if the king or they think has been captured or is dead, because she doesn't realize what happened to Barney either, because she wants to stand up and scream, stop, don't do this. And she watches her father just kind of taking in and knowing he's boiling inside, and her respect and love and admiration for her father grows even more there. And just as the crown's about to be put down, all of a sudden there's a commotion, and back at the gates and through the doorways, and there's a number of the guards for Peter at the castle there trying to stop these people on horseback. But the horses, they push their way through, and it's Butzo and his entourage along with Barney there. And it comes up and says, stop the ceremony. The real king is here. He's the one who needs to put on the crown. People are taken aback and surprised, but a lot of people are getting excited, saying, Leopold, or cheering the king on. And our group of bad guys decide, okay, I can see we're outnumbered, overpowered right now. We're going to step back and see how this plays out. And they withdraw from the area. And then Barney, as the king, as they believe he's the king, says he won't be coronated now. He says, some of you are still doubting who the rightful king is. Let us wait 2 days before there's a coronation, so people will know the rightful king is on the throne. And that's, again, you're talking about that honor of him doing, because he's not planning to be king. Mm-hmm. He's bring the king there, and the wording Burroughs uses when he talks, when Barney talks to people about, I want everyone to know that we all know it's the rightful king on the throne, because he wants it to. And that's 5, 6, 7, and 8 through part 1.
Yeah, and just to re-emphasize Barney's honesty, he's only pretending to be Leopold because there's no choice at that point. Yeah. It's the only way until he can get the real Leopold out of the sanitarium. This is the only way to stop Peter from being coronated. So everything he does indicates once again his honesty. Even when he's forced to use a deception, it's only when there's obviously no other choice. It's the only way to stop the villain, and only for as short a time as possible, and without taking personal advantage of it at all. So Barney really is an example of honor and honesty.
And this is, again, this section of people like the old swashbuckling movies and pirate movies and anything in that. These 4 chapters are just filled with intrigue and the fights and running, and they're fun chapters.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to do the last few chapters of part 1. With chapter 9, The King's Guess. Barney, I would be like banging my head against the wall right now if I were Barney. He's still trying to convince people he's not Leopold. He's trying to convince Butzow, who by now Butzow has proved himself to be loyal to the king and a great guy. And Butzow's skeptical, but at least he agrees to accompany Barney back to Tafelberg, back to the sanitarium. And Barney also talks to Emma and says, I'm not the king. I'm an American and I love you. And she's still unconvinced. She still thinks he's the real Leopold and says, I love you too. And the person she's in love with is Barney, but she thinks he's Leopold. It's real. I mean, from Barney's point of view, this has got to all be incredibly aggravating. But anyway, after dark, Barney and Butzow, they leave the castle and they head back to where the sanitarium is. But that guy who had seen them leaving the sanitarium earlier, he's gone to Peter, and he's spilled that information to Peter. He's basically an informant. So now Peter knows that Leopold is alive and he's in the sanitarium at Tafelberg. So he sends his main bad guys, his main 3 henchmen rather, including Menk, to the sanitarium. So Barney and Butzow, there's great action. The pacing here is very fast. The action is wonderful through these next couple of chapters. Barney and Butzow arrive just as Peter's men are taking Leopold. They spring forward to engage the men in a fight. During the battle, Leopold just tries to run away. He doesn't try to help the guy saving him. He just tries to just get away. And he's going to end up getting captured. And Barney and Butzow are overwhelmed and they're knocked out. So the bank and one of the other bad guys, Koblik, race after Leopold. After a few minutes, Barney and Butzow wake up. They're in the hospital with superficial wounds, but they learn that Leopold's been kidnapped. And that's chapter 9, which is just, as I said, it's got some great action in it. And I think a little bit more humor with Barney just banging his head against the wall, trying to convince somebody that he's not Leopold. You guys have any comments on that chapter?
Nothing from me.
I was just going to say, I think you summarized it pretty well.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. Now, chapter 10, the action really starts to expand. But Barney and Butzow are searching for Leopold. They go to Blent's castle. They learn that Leopold's not there. Butzow also finds out that Peter is gathering an army to take the Lustad, the main palace, by force. So he urges that they ride for the capital so that Barney can stand in for the king during the coronation. And Barney's reluctant to do this. He doesn't want to keep this deception up. It's once again his basic honesty at work. But he reluctantly returns to Letztow. And the Von Tan is relieved to have the king return, or the person he thinks is the king. And a cavalry officer reports that Peter has gathered actually a pretty respectable army. So he's a real threat to the castle. And the next morning, Peter attacks the castle. Barney, once again, I don't know where he went to school, because he turns out he's a good general too in directing troops. He starts directing troop movements, and he personally leads a cavalry charge that captures Peter's cannons. And I'm going through this, I'm summarizing this very quickly. This is a really large scale and vividly described battle scene. It's a great example of how well Burroughs wrote action, to keep it exciting, to make sure we understood what was going on. We understand the battle, what's going on in the battle at all times, because Burroughs describes it so well. When Peter sees the day is lost, he retreats and he asks for a conference. Barney sends a delegation to talk to him. You know, Peter is saying, well, I'm just saving Luther from an imposter, and this causes Von Tan confusion because he didn't know that there was an imposter. But Peter's not able to unmask the imposter. Barney just says, let's call a truce, so that, he uses this as an excuse. He says, let's call a truce. And Peter, if you can find proof that there's an imposter, you go for it. So he uses this as an excuse to end the killing. And that is the end of chapter 10. The chapter was called On the Battlefield because the meat of it is this big epic battle outside of the Castle Lustad. Any comments from you guys on that?
Would you say this is a chapter that serves as the inspiration for some of the artwork we've seen from Frazetta and
Yes.
Boris Vallejo?
Yes, and both of them did superb covers, and both of them used this scene, different interpretations of the scene for the cover, and they are both wonderful covers. They appeared on paperback editions in probably the 1960s or 70s.
Yes, on both cases, yes.
Right, and I have to say, I think both those are wonderful artists. I'm normally more of a Frazetta fan. Put these two paintings together, I kind of think that Boris Vallejo did a slightly more exciting cover in this case, but that's very much a personal opinion. That's subjective.
Give me soldiers on horseback, swords, and a good sized cannon. I'm pretty happy.
Yeah, they are great illustrations. So chapter 11, which is called a timely intervention. Barney's still trying to find Leopold. Bensau's got his men out finding him. And Peter is waiting for word from Koblik, one of the guys who had chased after Leopold. And Koblik arrives to say that Leopold's been captured and he's secure. And Peter says, well, the king's got to die. We got to get rid of him. So Koblik, you go back to murder him. And Koblik leaves Peter. He leaves, and then Peter announces to everybody that the body of Leopold's been found and that he must have been assassinated by Barney and Butzow. And they ride for the cathedral. So Peter thinks he's got an in now. He thinks the real Leopold's going to be killed, and he can use this to frame Barney for murdering the real king, and then finally he'll have the crown. Barney's frustrated because nobody on his side can find Leopold. Von Tan is feeling uncertain about who Barney really is now. But he just says, you must be a Ribbenroth. That's the name of the royal family. And Barney is a Ribbenroth through his mother. And say, even if you're not the king, I'm okay with you being on the throne because you're part of the royal family. And he'd seen him in battle, and he liked him, and he admired him, and he thinks you'd be a good king. Barney is beginning to realize that his mom never told him the full story about who she was. But finally, Barney shaves his beard off, by the way, as well. And he gets word from Bensau's men that the king has been found. So Barney and Bensau go after him. They arrive in the nick of time to prevent Leopold's murder. Mank is shot, and if you're reading just part 1, you get the impression that he's killed at this point. But we find out later that he's mostly dead, because he'll turn up again as a villain in part 2. So he's shot and he's out of the fight and left for dead. But he's going to turn up again later on. He's out of the story for now. At the cathedral, Peter's feeling confident. He thinks he's got it in. He thinks Leopold must be dead. He tells the crowd that Leopold is dead and that the imposter Barney, you got me doing it, Scott. Barney has fled, and he's going. And he announces himself as king. But then Kolbeck rushes in, goes to Peter, and says, "Mank is dead, and the imposter has rescued the king." And Von der Tan hears this as well, and the Peter is insisting that the coronation continue, though. But then the doors fly open, and a trooper is yelling, "Make way for Leopold of Lutha." So, Barney and Betso and the remainder of the royal horse escort bring Leopold in. Peter recognizes Leopold. He begs forgiveness. Emma looks into the eyes of Leopold and into the Barney, who's now clean shaven, and he knows who the king is. She finally gets it. She goes, Leopold is Leopold, Barney is Barney. I'm in love with Barney, but I'm promised to Leopold. So Leopold has Peter removed. He's crowned. So the bad guys have been foiled. Leopold is now officially the king. Everybody now finally has everyone else's identities worked out. It's all explained to Von der Tan who was who. Barney reveals that he's the son of Princess Victoria Reubenroth, who had eloped with Barney's father years before. And this eats away at Leopold. He now begins to view Barney as a possible contender for the throne. And Barney has risked his life to put Leopold there, and that should be obvious to Leopold. Barney's refused to take advantage of his position when he was pretending to be a Leopold. He could have married Emma at that point. He could have gotten the girl he loved, but he refused to take advantage of his situation at all. He's done nothing but be honorable. But Leopold, who's a rotten little selfish snot, sees everybody through that lens. I don't think he's capable of recognizing honor and honesty in another person. Barney's refusing a reward. He asks Emma to forgive him for the deception. Emma says, "I can never forgive you for not being king, for I'm betrothed to him and I love you." They kiss each other, and Leopold sees this, which ticks him off even more. Emma's sent away, and Barney's given 48 hours to leave Lutha. And Betso soon warns Barney that Leopold's changed his mind and is going to arrest him and hang him for treason. And Emma has also spurned Leopold. He says, "You're my king, I'm loyal to you, but I'm not going to marry you." So, warned that he's about to be hanged, Barney makes a getaway in the night. Bensow comes with him because he doesn't want to work for Leopold. And they have to, get across the border with some Luthian cavalry chasing them. But he gets away. He doesn't have the girl, but he gets away with a new best friend. And that brings part one to the end. That is the first half of what would become the novel, The Mad King. Any more remarks from you guys?
Yeah, that's a full story by itself. It definitely is.
Yeah, the only reason I think he was already planning a sequel was it's so rare for him not to eventually hook the girl up with the hero.
Yeah.
So, but it will be about a year and a half before he publishes part two. Writes and the outbreak of the Great War will affect the plot of that one, and we are going to be talking about that in our next podcast. We're actually making this a two-parter. So we are recording this on, what is today, May 2nd, 2021, and it will post within a few days, and somewhere about a week after that, part two, which will be our discussion of part two of the novel, will post. I did want to, as closing remarks, we've mentioned the book, The Eternal Savage, which is also called The Eternal Lover. That book was written in between part one and two, and it does feature Barney's sister, Victoria. She has a brief cameo in The Mad King in the second part, but she is the major character in The Eternal Savage, which also has a cameo from Tarzan. So this might be the first books, The Mad King and The Eternal Savage, where Burroughs was deliberately tying all his books together into one codified universe. I can't think of an earlier example.
One of the first instances of the crossover effect was Tanner of Gloucester. That's where we get introduced, as I recall. That's where we get introduced to Jason Gridley in the Gridley Way, I believe.
Yeah, but that comes after this, though. So I believe. So this might be an earlier example of the Burroughs' books all existing in the same universe. I'm not entirely sure of the timing of that, so I may be wrong.
Well, yeah, we'd have to check on that. But your point is still correct, though. This is a fine example of the extended Burroughs universe that wraps several of his characters and their worlds all in the same place, same universe.
Mhm.
which I find very exciting.
Yeah.
I think too, going off of Jess's comments earlier, I couldn't help my mind doing a little roving when we were talking about Dr. Stein. So you could legitimately, I guess, do a crossover where Tarzan ends up encountering members of the Frankenstein family or the next generation, which, I mean, he met King Kong, so
Was
There was a comic book that has been discussed a little bit in some of the comics, either from Malibu. I don't think it was Dark Horse. I think it was Malibu Comics. I mean, to your point is correct. It could be done. There would be legalities to be hashed out, but
Yeah.
it could be done.
I remember Dark Horse did a crossover with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I think they did the Phantom of the Opera too.
The title of the Tarzan story might have been Prometheus.
Okay.
If memory serves.
I remember that. I'm off of my memory. I think that might have been Dark Horse, but I'm very likely remembering that wrong. So, because I remember that title now. So yeah, but it's fun to think of Dr. Stein as a descendant of Frankenstein, and that all being part of the same universe as well.
Tarzan number 14 from Dark Horse, Prometheus.
Okay. And of course, the Frankenstein's monster, well, we're going off on another tangent, aren't we? The Frankenstein's monster ended up going off into the Arctic, and it's very easy to have him turn out to be alive. You just find his frozen body and thaw him out, and boom, he's back again.
He could drop through a hole into Pellucidor.
Yes. He could be back. We're doing all these tangents. He could hitch a ride with the Sea View from Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and get back.
All you got to do is you can't get there from here, but what you got to do is go to the frozen monster section at Kroger. You'll see Frankenstein right there, ready to go. You can have him with dinner that night. He can be your guest for dinner.
Yeah.
Well, or if you're Hannibal Lecter, you could have him over for dinner.
You could. So, okay. So that it is for that's as I said, that's going to be our podcast for tonight. Please visit our Edgar Rice Burroughs podcast store, which we have set up with the kind permission of the Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated, the people at Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated. I want to thank them for giving us permission to use trademark images in the store. And you're going to be able to find, by the time this posts, we're going to have a Mad King section set up in that that store with artwork, excellent artwork by my friend Ben Alvarez. You'll find t-shirts and drinkware and other things with images from the Mad King on it, as well as images in other sections of the store of Woola the Cowlet and Tars Tarkas and other images from Edgar Rice Burroughs or reminiscent of his stories.
The Woola artwork, I think, is especially cute.
It is.
So at least take a look at this stuff. Whether you get anything or not, at least take a look at it. It's intriguing.
Yeah, and you will find a link to the store in the notes for this podcast. Whatever podcast platform you're using to look at this, you will see the written notes there. It will include a link to our store. And also we have an email now, Edgar's Mailbag, all one word, @gmail.com. And we invite you for comments, for questions. I think it would be kind of cool if we got a few questions from people about Edgar Rice Burroughs that we could answer on the podcast, and that Jess, you could post on your Facebook group. But just comments about what you think of our podcast, which are hopefully good things, and suggestions for what works of Burroughs you might like to see us cover in the future. So that is Edgar's Mailbag @gmail.com. Once again, this will be in the show notes, so it'll be right there for you to see. So send us an email and let us know what you think, or just ask us a Burroughs related question. Anything else you guys want to cover before we?
I was gonna say on the online store there, I'm gonna order a mug or a t-shirt or something for my wife for Mother's Day.
Oh, that'll be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing says Mother's Day like Tars Tarkas on a cup. So,
very true. Very true.
Yes. but well, he was the only Thark we know that knew who his wife was and who his daughter was. So he's actually a good choice for Mother's Day.
Yeah.
So, okay, so signing out. My name is Tim DeForest. My blog is called Comics, Old Time Radio, and Other Cool Stuff. You can find a link to my Amazon.com author page there if you want to spend money on even more stuff. Jess and Scott, anything you guys want to plug?
Well, I want to be sure to once again give a shout out to John Martin, who provided some of the research materials I've been using tonight. So, John, thank you for your help. Also, I want to be sure to mention once again the webcomics over at www.edgarriceburroughs.com. Webcomics, Mad King there, written by Martin Gately, and a fine creative crew supporting him with beautiful artwork. I mean, if you look at some of the artwork, it's incredibly detailed for Mad King. So be sure and check that out.
Those are
my name is
fabulous strips over there.
Yes, they are. My name is Jess Terrell, and you will find me every day discussing Burroughs on Facebook at For the Love of All Things Edgar Rice Burroughs with Lilla Pop. We've got 4,000 plus fans who just love to talk Edgar Rice Burroughs. Okay, Scott.
Just Scott Stewart. Hope everyone enjoys the broadcast and returns for part 2.